But Xi Jinping really cares about power, really cares about control. And therefore, he's willing to crush things, crush people like Jack Ma, etc., in order to stay in power. And that has greatly harmed the economy. The answer might be right now China's planning to invade in 6 years, but something might happen and Xi Jinping might send them in 2 years from now. I also worry about a blockade, and I think people will be trapped in China, and I think business will go basically to zero.
Hello, and welcome back to our channel. We're taking a deep dive into the current state of China and its impact on the global stage. China's trajectory. Is it heading towards a North Korea-like model? Xi Jinping's economic priorities. Does he genuinely care about the economy? The Russia-Ukraine conflict's impact on China's global perception. The driving forces behind Xi Jinping's leadership. Strategies for Chinese businesses to thrive amidst uncertainty. Why is investment still flowing into China's market?
Hi everyone, today we have a guest from Seattle. It's Dan Harris. He's a lawyer with a huge interest in China. He tweets and posts and writes about China, and I'm very interested in his opinion about the Chinese economy, society. Dan, welcome to the show.
Great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you
I'm
very
looking
much.
forward to it.
Could you please tell us a little bit about yourself and where does your interest in China come from?
Okay, well, I am a lawyer, and for many years, my work mostly focused on Russia and South Korea, fishing industry, timber industry, mining industry. A lot of Seattle companies were involved in those two regions. And back in, I think, around 2000, I found myself in Busan, Korea, working for a Russian slash Singapore company and an American company. And I was working on behalf of those two companies to arrest a Russian ship that was supposed to come into Busan, Korea. But it didn't come into Busan. It was heading to Dalian because I was worried we would seize it in Busan, which is why I was in Busan. So I thought, I've spent a week here. I can't let this ship just get away. I need to go to Dalian and try and arrest it. And I'd never been to China. And through contacts, I connected with an excellent lawyer there, met with her. We waited for the ship to come in, and we then learned it was going to Qingdao. So then I flew to Qingdao. She connected me with a law firm there. I got to know the lead lawyer there. We became very good friends. We're still good friends. And we decided we needed to cooperate, our two firms. And so we did. And I got back to Seattle and I said, things are happening in China. We need to be there. I brought in an old friend who had been the head of international at my old law firm. He was teaching Chinese law at the University of Washington. I convinced him to move to Qingdao, and that's how our China practice was born. We've been dealing with China ever since, and that's why I've always been so interested in China. One tiny bit of additional history is that I was very pro-China until around 2013. When people would complain about China not following rules, laws, etc., I would say, give them a chance. They're trying. You don't go from 0 to 100 in 1 year. Starting in around 2013, I started becoming, I would say, neutral on China. And then starting in 2016, 2017, I really began souring on China for a lot of different reasons, many of which you'll probably hear later tonight.
Great. You just mentioned this before the show when we talked, just warming up. You said you were in Poland recently. Could you please tell me a few words? What's your impression about Poland?
Okay. Well, I first went to Poland to speak at the University of Warsaw Law School. I was a guest professor for 3 or 4 days, and I loved it. And I loved the university. I loved the history of Poland, and I really liked Poland. Now, thinking about it, I had actually been there 5 years earlier on behalf of a client. I spent about a week in Wrocław, I think it's called. I always have trouble pronouncing it. It's pronounced nothing the way it's spelled, at least.
No. It's good. It's really good. Correct. Yeah.
Okay. But I think I love going to countries that I have a vague understanding of, and then I'm proven completely wrong. Because Poland, in my mind, I spent some time on Sakhalin Island. I've been to Vladivostok. I expected Poland to be like those places. It is not. It's Warsaw is closer to Paris than it is to Vladivostok, and also. We Americans of my age, we were taught that everything is bad about Eastern Europe because they were a bunch of communists, including the food. And Poland has really good food. It always surprises people when I say that. But, they're like, what did you eat there? Especially since I don't eat meat. I'm like, I ate really well. So, my wife and I went there about 6 months ago. We went to Warsaw where it was really cold. And we did some outdoor tours. And then we went to Krakow where it was less cold. And there's a lot of history in Poland in both those cities. And they're excellent tourist sites in both cities. People need to go there.
I have to ask, have you been to Taiwan?
I've been to Taiwan, but only once. I like Taiwan. I think of it as kind of, it's a little like China. It's a little like Hong Kong, but it's calmer, cleaner, nicer, and talk about great food. Wow.
I guess this is how China could be if it wouldn't have a dictatorship.
Yes, but China. So, how many years away is China from that? I don't know. I used to go to Russia a lot. And I had a Russian lawyer friend, and I'd always say, I always feel like Russia's 50 years away from being an accomplished country. And he said to me, yeah, we're always going to be 50 years away. And I've come to believe that about Russia. And now I feel like China, and I've been saying this since probably 2017, China is heading in the direction of North Korea a lot more than it's heading in the direction of Denmark. So I don't think China's going to be better in 10 years. I think it's going to be a lot worse. And that makes me sad because despite the fact that I'm negative on China, a part of me still loves the country and I have a lot of friends there. And one of the things I always tell people is, I tell people in the United States, I tell the right wingers, the extreme right wingers this in the United States, and I tell the China Amen crowd, who both of those groups want everybody to believe that China is a monolithic entity and 99% of the people are followers or robots of the CCP. But that is not true because there were a lot of people who did not want Xi Jinping to become president, and those people have not disappeared. And here's a Poland story for you. When I was in Poland, there was a guest professor there from Tsinghua Law School, and he said, I want to talk to you about Trump's tariffs. This is right after Trump's tariffs came down. And I thought, I really don't want to talk to him about it. He's going to complain. I'm going to say, look, I don't know if these are going to be good or bad, but it's time the United States did something. China's been cheating on trade for years. And then we're going to fight, and that's going to be it. Well, finally, he cornered me. And he said, I want to talk to you about the Trump tariffs. I'm glad the U.S. instituted those tariffs because I hope it leads to reform in China. We are backsliding, and I hope it's going to stop. And I said, you know what? I'm on the exact same page. That's my hope. And you know what? As I say this, I get a sadness because it makes me sad that it didn't work They haven't reformed. They've moved away from reform. But I'm even sadder for the people in China, the good people in China who wanted reform. They have to live under this, as you called it, dictatorship, and that's what it is. And I feel bad for those people. They deserve better. And so when I complain about China, I'm not complaining about the Chinese. I'm complaining for the Chinese who are not, and I don't purport to know exactly what they want, of course, but they're not allowed to complain.
Dear viewers, help us overcome algorithm suppression by liking, commenting, and sharing this important content, especially since we talk to world's top experts.
Yeah, so it kind of answered my next question. I wanted to ask you, how do you collect your information? Because you seem to know a lot what's going on in China. Let's talk a bit about the economy. So maybe you could say a few sentences how else you gather information. You have clients, customers, you have friends. So let's talk about how is the Chinese economy doing now? Because you wrote on Twitter, you have a great account, we're very active, and you wrote on Twitter that 5 years ago you had 2 to 4 China risk assessments a year. Now you have like one last month, and now you have like two per week. So it looks like it's really getting more and more. Why do people need to assess the risk of not only investing, even living in China?
Or even going there. Okay, so 8 years ago, if I had a risk assessment, there was a damn good reason. It was, hey, I got into a bar fight in China, and now I want to go back. What are my risks? Or I'm in a big dispute with a Chinese company. What are my risks? There were companies and people who had specific reasons for worry. Now, I'm banging out 2 or 3 of those a week, and they're normal companies. And, half the time, my first thought is, why are you even calling me? And then there's always something that they have thought of about their own company that worries them. So last week I spoke to a company and they told me, I looked them up. I always look at them before I talk to them, try to figure out what they're doing, try to figure out what their risks are. I'm looking at this company, and basically it looks to me like they have no risks. I mean, they have a woofie in China that makes widgets. It employs 30 people. They're contributing to the Chinese economy. It's not a sensitive product, nothing. So I start talking to them, and they say, well, here are some of our risks. And one of their risks is we're not in compliance with China data compliance laws. And I go, okay, but nobody is. And they go, okay, right, but we're doing this with this company. I can't get more specific than that. Not a huge risk, but, and I said, okay, you might be more likely to be called out. And then they're saying things like, and there are rumors that we want to leave China. I said, okay, is that true? They said, no, not really. But we're like everybody else. We're not saying we're going to be there for the next 20 years. We're concerned. So have people heard something? I don't know. So that's these things that are relevant for everybody, they're very concerned with. And they're very concerned because they see anti-foreigner sentiment rising. They see a government that seems to not care at all about the economy. There are still some people in the Chinese government who do care about the economy. I don't know that XiJinping does. He thinks about it maybe once every 6 months when someone comes in and says, hey, things are getting really bad. And he might say, yeah, go tell the foreigners we really want them to stay here and things are going to be good. But one of my tweets was, and I got this from a client who said to me, what are they thinking? They're coming out now again and saying, we really care about you. Things are going to get better, etc. And he said, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. And I put on Twitter, fool everyone 888,922 times. We stopped listening. People are laughing. They're literally laughing. That's what I'm hearing from my clients who are being told these things. Nobody believes it. And so, yes, the risks are rising. And what's also scary is there's no protection. And what I mean by that is that I've been warning companies about China since 2016. And I felt like very few listened, some did. We were basically saying the trade war, it's more than a trade war. It's a geopolitical war. It is not going to end. It is not going to get better. And everybody was waiting for Biden to get elected, believing that it would all change. And we're like, no, it's not going to change. It didn't change. People still didn't listen. What caused people to stand up is Russia. All of a sudden, people thought Russia invades Ukraine, companies flee, leaving behind tons and tons of money and assets. And I was actually shocked at how unprepared companies were. In fact, my wife and I are big shareholders in McDonald's, and it didn't even occur to me to worry about it because I just assumed that all the McDonald's in Russia were franchises. So I didn't even think about it. Then all of a sudden I learned they had 1,000 stores there. And I'm like, what the heck? Because we represent some companies similar to McDonald's that are in China, and people think they're in China, but they actually got out. They're franchising and they're licensing. They're not really there. They reduced their footprint. And I was surprised people hadn't done that in Russia. So all of a sudden people said Russia invades Ukraine and businesses get torched and people get held hostage. Brittany Griner, others. And they thought, is this going to be China when China invades Taiwan? And people would say, what's that going to be like? And I mentioned this to you before we came on, there are countless risks involving China. But the one risk that terrifies everybody and that everybody wants to talk to me about is China invading Taiwan. And I always have to tell them, look, I read constantly about that, and I have no idea if China's going to invade Taiwan or when. And the reality is nobody knows, because not even the U.S. military, not even the CIA, because the answer might be right now China's planning to invade in 6 years, but something might happen and Xi Jinping might send them in 2 years from now. I also worry about a blockade, and I think people will be trapped in China, and I think business will go basically to zero.
Yeah, you mentioned one very interesting thing. You mentioned Xi Jinping and his attitude to money and economy. And my read on him is that I think he doesn't care. Like, there was a case years ago when his cousin or uncle was caught laundering money, and I think in Singapore or somewhere else they were laundering in a casino. So, and apparently that's a rumor, he told him to sell everything. And when you look at the lockdowns, I believe he might not even be very corrupt personally, because I think he literally doesn't care. He's interested in making history, like Mao won the war, then opened the country, and the only thing he can do now to get in the history books is to annex Taiwan. So I think this is really what he's about, not even so much about money. And you can tell during the lockdowns, he inherited a flourishing economy. He was on the way up, and now it's like there is no bottom. So this is actually the worst thing, I think, for us in the rest of the world, that the guy doesn't really care. It's all about him, his vanity, and his role in the history.
I 98% agree with you. And I'll talk about the 2% in a minute. Uh, Even back in 2003, 2005, 2007, Americans and Western Europeans mistakenly thought money drove everything. So we would have clients who would say, you know, the Chinese government, they're mad at me because I'm polluting the air and the water and I'm mistreating the workers, but I'm giving them 300 jobs, so I'm invincible. I'm like, no, you're not. They don't care about you. Their number one goal has always been to stay in power. Okay, so that's not such a bad goal. And back then, it wasn't such a bad goal because what they did to try and stay in power back then is keep the people happy, give them clean water, give them clean air, make them literate, give them health care. That's not such a bad thing. It doesn't mean they're going to let some foreign company mistreat workers because they're bringing in $1 million a year. No, because their priority is, well, back then was to keep the people happy. They basically made a deal with the people. You let us rule, we'll do what we can for you. And there was that trade-off. And there was a lot of optimism in China then because the trade-off was working, and life was getting better. Xi Jinping came in, and it was still these two countervailing forces: control, power, staying in power versus a thriving economy. But Xi Jinping really cares about power, really cares about control. And therefore, he's willing to crush things, crush people like Jack Ma, etc., in order to stay in power. And that has greatly harmed the economy. And so I agree with you. That's his concern. He wants to make history. Invading Taiwan is going to put him in the history books. Is he corrupt? Is that what's driving him? I don't know. I don't know if that's a big issue. I know he's got a ton of money.
Yeah, definitely.
But I don't think it. I don't think he's doing these things to get more money. I think he's doing it because he wants to build up China the way Vladimir Putin wants to build up Russia. I think Xi Jinping's smarter than Vladimir Putin, which is probably a good thing. And I mean, he has patience. And so it's going to be interesting to see what happens. It's going to be tough to predict. But yes, the economy has fallen down.
If you believe in me, please like it, leave a comment and share the show with friends. It might not look like it, but I have quite a lot of expenses. I am not asking for money, only for support. The goal of this program is to spread the knowledge.
My next question would be, because we talked about foreign businesses, what about Chinese businesses? I mean, we see the influx of rich Chinese into Singapore. We see them, running away, fleeing. What about Chinese businesses? What can they do? I mean, it's as bad as for the foreigners, I guess.
Yes. And you just answered the question. What can they do? They can flee. Now, here's what's interesting. I mentioned before we came on, I was talking about how we used to do a lot of work with Russia. When the Soviet Union fell, we had a client who did a deal with a Russian company. And the deal was a great deal for our client and for the Russian company. The Russian company could have made $1 to $5 million a year for the next 10 years. But they stole $350,000 really early on. So when that happened, I was floored. I met with a friend of mine, a terrific human being, no longer with us. He had a PhD in diplomacy from Moscow State University. And I sat down with him. I said, what the heck happened here? And he said, what you have to realize, Dan, is that there there are still a lot of people in Russia who think like the Soviet Union. And in the Soviet Union, just because there was a glimmer of hope and things are looking good now, nobody believed it. So if you gave somebody the choice of $350,000 now or $1 million every year for 5 years, they'd take the $350,000 because they don't believe the government is going to let them make $1 million for the next 5 years. Because there is no future in Russia. There's a revolution, there's Putin, there's the oligarchies, all that. It's not made for people to do well on merit, so they don't buy into it. China in 2003 was optimistic. It was optimistic in 2010. Now there is massive cynicism in China for Chinese businesses. They are panicking. And so what we're seeing Chinese companies do is similar to what I saw with that 350,000. Factories are taking orders with no intention of providing product because they don't think there's a future. I'm going to grab this $1 million. And that is greatly increasing the risks. So as I trace it, there was a period, after in like 2008, 2009, we were getting a call a week from companies that were having major problems with manufacturers in China. And then by 2015, we would barely get those calls. Now we're getting a ton of them. Things are falling apart. People are cynical.
How do you explain the German car manufacturers who are still pouring money into China? Is it desperation? Is it just no other way to conduct business?
I don't know. I really don't know. All I know is that we had a client that was offered a concession, basically, to build a hotel. And it was completely illegal. And we told the client, this hotel is completely illegal. It was built on military property. It could be shut down before it opens. It could be shut down a day after it opens, a week after, a month after, 10 years. And the person did some analysis, and he said, all I have to do is keep it open for 2.5 years, and I'll make a ton of money. And he kept it open for 8 years. Okay, so when I see what companies do, I can't judge them because I don't know what their thinking is. But I do sometimes see companies, including sophisticated, smart companies, who essentially believe that what's happening to everybody else is they'll put a reason on it. It's not going to happen to me. Well, that company's in this business. This company that got in trouble is in this business. That company's in that business. That company did this wrong. I have a friend in the local government. This could never happen. I once told a story. I was speaking in Philadelphia. And I was talking about corruption. And I've only told this story once. I would never tell it again live because it did not go over very well. But the story I told is that we had a paralegal whose father was the vice governor of a region in Russia. And he was known for being rather corrupt. But it was very good for our law firm because all the Russian companies from this region would contact us and we'd do their legal work around the world because they wanted to look good for this vice governor. Well, one day the vice governor came home and somebody was waiting for him with an axe and killed him in the staircase of his apartment. Well, we lost all our business. And people don't realize that that's what happens in China. That's where Guanxi goes to die. Whenever your person in government gets pushed out, and it happens, then the new person does whatever they can to make your life miserable and drive you out because you become arrival. And Americans tend not to understand that. They think I've got this friend for life. And so we do see naivete by all size companies. But some of them are actually very savvy and are like, look, we're there. We're making money. We're not going to leave. And what we do for a lot of companies is we lighten their footprint in China. So, like I said, we represent some fast food companies in China. People think they're in China, but they're really not. And they're at the extreme low end of risk. You know, if things shut down, they might not make the money that they're making, but they're not going to lose much in assets because they have almost nothing there in assets. And so there are companies that are doing that and people don't even realize it.